question is that Clause 24 stand part of the bill. As many as are of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
To the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The question is that Clause 25 stand part of the bill. As many as are of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
To the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. We now move on to Amendment 120 to Clause 26, with which it will be convenient to debate Amendments 121, 113, 122, 9, 114 and 10 to Clause 26, and that Clause 26 to 30 stand part of the bill, and new Clause 43. I call Hannah Bardell to move the amendment.
Thank you, Sir David. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairpersonship, and I'm pleased to move Amendments 120 and the other amendments in the name of my honourable friends. I'm also delighted to see cross-party support from our friends in the Labour Party as we look at this amendment and the others. And as the SNP spokesperson on fair work and employment, I rise to speak up for the many who will be looking to the Scotland Bill in the hope that it delivers on Smith and gives the Scottish Parliament those tangible new powers so trumpeted by those on the government benches. Yet we on the SNP benches find the powers on offer today sadly lacking, and I'm disappointed to see that the lack of willingness to accept any amendments or any movement from the proposals that we on this side of the House put forward. Smith was very clear on the devolution of employment programmes, and I quote directly that the Scottish Parliament will have all powers over support for unemployed people through the employment programmes currently contracted by the Department of Work and Pensions, which are presently delivered mainly, but not exclusively, through the Work Programme and Work Choice, on expiry of the current commercial arrangements. The Scottish Parliament will have the power to decide how it operates these core employment support services, and funding for these services will be transferred to the UK Parliament in line with the principles set out in paragraph 95. However, the Scottish Parliament devolution for the Powers Committee in its interim report on the draft Scotland Bill clauses considered at paragraph 335 that the clauses as currently drafted do not fully implement the Smith Commission recommendations. The committee considers that the Smith Commission intended that all employment programmes currently contracted by the Department of Work and Pensions should be devolved. Therefore, the committee recommends that any future bill should not place any restrictions on the type of person receiving support or in regard to the length of unemployment any person has experienced. The committee considers that this should include the devolution of the Access to Work programme. And at paragraph 337, the committee also recommended that the principle which will govern the operation of intergovernmental relations with regard to welfare, including employment support, should be in any future bill devolving power in this area. The committee expected that this would include the principles via which the Scottish and UK Parliaments could maintain scrutiny and oversight of the intergovernmental machinery with regard to welfare and employment support. And the Employment Support Clause 26 in the Scotland Bill, as introduced, does not have any changes from the draft clauses. The UK Government has not, therefore, followed the views of the all-party Scottish Parliament Committee, of which the party in government across the House had members, and the bill as it stands does not deliver on Smith. Sir David, there is no evidence of the respect agenda in the bill put forward and by their voting intentions. And Sir David, it's also vital that these employment powers give Scotland the power to give Scottish solutions to Scottish challenges. It's simply not good enough to one thing in the Smith Commission, then come to this House with a bill that does not live up to the promises made. Furthermore, the overwhelming mandate of the Scottish people has given the SNP indicates they expect this Parliament to deliver beyond Smith. Smith is not the floor, but the ceiling, nor the ceiling of our aspirations for the people of Scotland. Certainly.
I'm very grateful to the Honourable Lady for giving way. She makes, I think, a compelling case for employment support to be devolved to Scotland, but does she also agree that it needs to be devolved still further within Scotland so that local authorities in Scotland can also develop work programmes to suit their needs? So, for example, the needs of Glasgow are very different to the needs of the Highlands.
Yeah. The honourable member makes a fair point, and you know, we've had significant success, and I do agree with him to an extent through our Opportunities for All programme, which, if he will give me some time, he obviously has some insight into what I was going to say as well, and I will come on to that later in my speech. You know, the fact of the matter is that. As I was going to say, quite simply, the people of Scotland deserve better. We need a streamlined system that looks holistically at how we support people back to work and what kind of employment they are offered, rather than the random approach that seems to take place much of the time at present. We need to look at what people's skill sets and expertise are and what potential they have to offer. We hear much talk of aspiration from the government benches, yet the stream of people I've had through my door at my constituency surgeries in Livingston in the last few weeks, concerned about benefits cuts and sanctions, suggests that the concept of aspiration and opportunity certainly did not make its way into this section of the Scotland Bill. If we are to truly give the unemployed opportunities through these programmes, the Scottish Parliament must have the powers it needs at its disposal to tailor these programmes for the most in need. As the Devolution Committee pointed out at paragraph 303, the original Scotland Act in 1998 reserved employment policy. This included job search and support, with the exception of career services and training for employment. Draft Clause 22, which became Clause 26 in the published bill, set out further exceptions to the reservation in the 1998 Act. These are assisting disabled persons to select, obtain and retain employment, and to assist persons claiming reserve benefits who are at risk of long-term unemployment to select, obtain and retain employment where the assistance is for at least a year. However, a range of organisations expressed a view on whether suggested clause delivered on the Smith Agreement. And at paragraph 303, Inclusion Scotland are quoted in their written evidence as saying, "The Smith Commission proposals that the Scottish Parliament will have all powers over support for employed people through the employment programmes currently contracted by the Department of Work and Pension. However, both the narrative and draft clauses appear to restrict this power to employment support schemes that last over a year. It's not clear why this restriction has been included, and it appears to be a direct contradiction of the Smith Commission proposal. Inclusion Scotland also argued that the most effective employment support schemes are short-term schemes designed to identify the barriers preventing someone gaining employment and providing support, training and assistance to overcome these. If a scheme lasts for more than a year without supporting someone into employment, surely it has failed." And Inclusion Scotland also pointed out that the UK Government also appears to have arbitrarily applied the reference to conditionality and sanctioning for universal credit to devolved employment support schemes, including the use of mandatory placements. It's not clear, they say, how this is compatible with the Scottish Parliament having all powers over support for unemployed people through the employment programme. For example, if the Scottish Parliament determines that participation in such schemes should be voluntary. The Scottish Government's view presented to the committee was that the proposed clause fell short of implementing the Smith Commission's recommendations, that the Scottish Parliament should have all powers over support for unemployed people through the employment programmes currently contracted by the Department of Work and Pensions. And in a follow-up letter after his evidence to the committee, our Deputy First Minister John Swinney said that the Scottish Government strongly agree with the concerns about employment raised in evidence to the committee. The main effect of clause now 26 of the draft Scotland Bill suggested by the UK Government is that it would devolve work programme and work choice only. We believe that devolution of employment support on this basis is inconsistent with both the letter and spirit of paragraph 57 of the Smith Commission report. The relationship between devolved and reserved powers and the two governments is of particular importance in relation to employment programmes, and the importance of the devolution of these powers was highlighted by Jim McCormack of the Social Security Advisory Committee when he stated in evidence to the committee that it strikes me that a revised work programme could help people at risk of long-term unemployment and disabled people into work and could get them support in staying in work. Under the proposals, we might end up in a situation in which future public service providers in Scotland, which might be third sector providers, would be accountable to the Scottish Parliament for their financial performance and their programme performance, but would still have to apply a conditionality system and sanctions regimes to those programmes. As well as creating problems for claimants, that would create strange incentives for providers, and it would create incentives for gaming and false reporting, he claims. That is a particularly jagged edge, because one thing that we know about the current social security system and the welfare reforms is that a tougher sanction system has caused a great deal of difficulty for some of the most vulnerable people in our society. That jagged edge around conditionality is a particular cause for concern. At paragraph 311, the committee explored the interaction between reserved and devolved programmes, particularly with regard to the DWP conditionality and sanctions regimes remaining reserved. The committee report said that it has been of particular concern to some of our witnesses. John Dickey told the committee that as far as working age benefits are concerned, the current reserve conditionality and sanctions regime, which is undermining people's attempt to move into work and towards the labour market, will still apply. And he continued that it comes back to Jim McCormack's point about the jagged edge between what we in Scotland might want to do differently in devolved employment programmes and the requirement for those programmes to work within a reserved benefits regime that too often imposes arbitrary conditions or conditions that are not helpful in supporting people to move into work and which imposes damaging sanctions on them when they fail to meet those conditions, a matter which has been discussed widely today. John also stated that his hopes were that we could reduce the number of inappropriate or arbitrary tasks that people have to undertake to meet benefit requirements. However, there will be a limit to that because of the benefits regime will be as it is now, unless, of course, we manage to get it changed in the way that we want. I would certainly argue that if the party and government continue voting the way they have been voting, we're certainly not going to get what we want, and people are going to continue to be sanctioned in the most iniquitous way. And Sir David, what we in the SNP want is an end to the punitive and iniquitous benefit sanctions that disproportionately affect women and vulnerable people, and often those with mental health issues. In a modern society such as ours, how can we justify or indeed explain nearly 150,000 sanctions being applied in Scotland, affecting nearly 85,000 individuals, including nearly 3,000 disabled people, between the end of 2012 and September 2014? If we want to help people to find a job, how is making them hungry, unable to pay bills and increase their debt supporting them to do that? Sadly, Professor David Webster has highlighted that the number of sanctions resulting from the work programme is considerably higher than the number of people obtaining jobs from the work programme. In Scotland, 46,265 sanctions were applied between June 2011 and March 2014. Because these claimants failed to participate in the work programme. During the same period, 26,740 job outcomes resulted from the work programme. Rather ironic and very sad. Dame Anne Begg, former chair of the Work and Pensions Committee, said that benefit sanctions are controversial because they withhold subsidence-level benefits from people who may have little or no other income. We agree that benefit conditionality is necessary, but it is essential that policy is based on clear evidence of what works in terms of encouraging people to take up the support which is available to help them get back into work. The policy must then be applied fairly and proportionately. The system must also be capable of identifying and protecting vulnerable people, including those with mental health problems and learning disabilities. Turning to access to work and the lack of clarity around this area, John Swinney also gave his view. In respect of access to work, we've asked the UK Government to clarify whether access to work will be devolved under Clause 26, and they have made clear their expectation that as this programme is a Job Centre Plus service to customers and not contracted employment programme, it will remain reserved. In response, Ian Duncan-Smith explained why there were two different definitions, that claimants need different types of support to enter the job market, and that in the early stages some of this comes under Job Centre Plus, which remains a reserved issue. In the longer term, claimants are referred onto work programme or work choice and the aspects of the provisions to be devolved. In the response to the Devolution Committee report, the Scottish Government made clear that they thought Clause 26 of the Scotland Bill is inconsistent with the letter and spirit of paragraph 57 of the Smith Commission Heads of Agreement. The view from Scottish ministers that the relevant section of the bill contains limitations that mean it does not deliver on Smith in full, and these limitations are that support can only be provided to A. those at risk, B, those claiming reserve benefits, or C, assistance lasting for at least 1 year. The key policy point here is that the way to tackle long-term unemployment is to intervene early. Indeed, one of our main criticisms of the current work programme is that the time you have to be unemployed before the programme is open to you. We wait until people are long-term unemployed, 9 months for up to 24-year-olds, and 12 months thereafter, before acting. And what we should be doing is acting to support them into employment before they become long-term employed. Yes, please.
Mr. Eilidh.
I'm very grateful the Honourable Lady's making a marvellous speech about the devolution of the work programme. I wondered if she would go further. I had a private member's bill last year to devolve the work programme, not just to the Scottish Parliament, but to local authorities who are delivering programmes already. Would you agree with that double devolution down to local authorities?
I think that's something that I'd certainly be interested in taking a closer look at and discussing with my colleagues, and I welcome the Honourable Member's contribution. This approach, as I was going on to say, for example, is supported by the EU for youth unemployment. And Sir David, we are keen to see the powers that we were promised delivered to Scotland. Delivery of these powers and the passing of our proposals today would help create a more joined-up approach to employment service provision for disabled people, as well as the many others mentioned, and a more integrated support for these vulnerable groups. While demand-led, the current DWP spend on access to work in Scotland is disproportionately low, and the Scottish Government has previously stated that this programme should be devolved to allow us to promote a more equitable share of spend in Scotland and more disabled people into sustained employment. In summary, Sir David, it's not just the SNP that sees some significant flaws in the bill as proposed. Citizens Advice Scotland also note that the Smith Commission report provided that the Scottish Parliament should have powers over all employment programmes currently contracted by the DWP. However, Clause 26 of the bill restricts the powers devolved to employment support programmes that last at least a year. It's unclear, as I've said, why this restriction has been included. The bill drafted would appear to only devolve the work programme and work choice, which is inconsistent with Smith. And Clause 26, as currently drafted, does not clearly devolve powers of the Access to Work scheme. Both SCVO and SAMH support the amendments, which serve to devolve all employment powers and functions to Scotland covering access to work, devolution of services and Job Centre Plus. In Scotland, with the limited powers we have, Sir David, we have proven that we can make a difference to people's lives. And the SNP government has done its best to mitigate the damage done by the Westminster cuts to date. But time is running out. And if we do not gain these powers that we were promised, we cannot continue to protect the vulnerable and grow our economy. We have an excellent track record on apprenticeships and training for young people. In 2007, there were just 15,000 people starting modern apprenticeships. We're now delivering more than 25,000 modern apprenticeships, and will increase that number by 30,000 by 2020. The Scottish Government's Opportunities for All, as the Honourable Member I was coming on to, has also been a significant success, with over 90% of young people going on to positive destinations. And in my own county of West Lothian, that figure stands at over 96%. Today, we're glad to announce that the Scottish Government has reached the 250th Scottish business that has signed up to the living wage at a nursery in West Lothian. And the opportunity, I have to say, to work is one that the vast majority of the people in Scotland seek. The SNP want to see dignity and work for all, and I commend our proposals to the House.
The question is that Amendment 120 be made. Kate Green.
Thank you very much indeed, Sir David. I would like to speak particularly to Amendments 113, 9, 114 and 10, although much of what I will say will echo what the Honourable Lady for Livingston has just said in relation to the devolving of employment programmes. And I think it's very clear, Sir David, that labour markets are different both across the UK and indeed not just between England, Scotland and Wales, but within the nations of England, Scotland and Wales. And that's why I very much echo the point made by my honourable friend, the member for Denton and Reddish, about the opportunity that our amendments and indeed the SNP amendments offer, not just for devolution to Scotland, but for double devolution within Scotland of some of the labour market programmes. Yes, of course.
I'm very grateful for my honourable friend for giving way. She will know, as a Greater Manchester MP like myself, that as part of the citizen devolution package to Greater Manchester, that they will be invited to bid for the next phase of the work programme. Doesn't that lead on very much to the point made by our honourable friend, the member for Edinburgh South, of the need to have double devolution in Scotland so that the communities within Scotland can develop work programmes that aren't centralised by Holyrood but specific to those communities?
Well, I do agree with that, and I think it was Labour's intention, of course, in our manifesto to devolve labour market programmes to what we described as a combined authority footprint. That would enable recognition of the fact that local labour markets differ. It would recognise the different industrial history and characteristics of the people who live in particular parts of the country, and it would also, importantly, of course, allow a very close alignment both with skills and with the industrial opportunities that arise in particular communities. And so I think we would want to see that opportunity for devolution to a sensible, localised level of labour market programmes. I doubt if it's the whole of Scotland, because the labour markets within Scotland are going to be quite significantly different, given the very considerable differences, for example, between the Highlands and the Central Belt conurbations. I think it's also... yes, of course, I'll give way to the Honourable Gentleman.
Up to what she's saying, but does she not recognise there are also difficulties within this, like my own, for example, where the unemployment is very low, but there's very low wages within that, and there are fairly prosperous areas and areas that are not prosperous. So it's very difficult to say a local authority area, for example, is a suitable area for devolving it down to.
I readily accept a local authority area may be too small. What I think is important is to get the geography right, and it may not be that it is across the whole of Scotland, and we would certainly want to have the opportunity to explore the right geography for this devolution, and not to assume that centralising in Holyrood will necessarily meet the needs best of labour markets across Scotland. I think, Sir David, it's also important to recognise, and our Amendment 113 specifically addresses this point, that devolving programmes only if they are going to last longer than a year actually misses the point for a lot of people who suffer very poor employment outcomes. It's relatively, in fact, it's extremely rare, Sir David, contrary to popular prejudice, for people never to have worked. People who experience very poor labour market outcomes have mostly been in and out of poor quality, poorly paid work over many decades, and that's been true of many generations of their family too. There is an opportunity by devolving at an earlier stage the opportunity for the Scottish Parliament to develop labour market programmes to break into that cycle, not of worklessness, but of in and out of poor quality work, and develop interventions that actually enable people to sustain and develop and progress at work, something that I have to say that the work programme has really not been successful in doing. Yes, of course I can wait.
And on that point, I mean, is it not better for people to find the right job for them rather than any job?
Well, there's certainly quite good and quite long-standing evidence, for example, from the United States, that labour market outcomes for people where more time has been invested up front and equipping them with the skills and qualifications to move into better jobs and better paid jobs are more likely to leave them in sustainable employment, and of course in the kind of employment that means they will escape poverty. And it's a shocking characteristic of our labour economy in this country at the moment, that so often people move into work but do not escape poverty, contributing to the very, very high levels of in-work poverty that we see in this country today. So I think we would like to see the opportunity for earlier intervention and for devolving programmes of a shorter period than 12 months. And we would also, I think, with our Amendment 10, like to offer the opportunity for the replication of the very, very successful Future Jobs Fund model that Labour introduced in the wake of the financial crash, and which has been shown by the Department for Work and Pensions' own evaluation to have been extremely effective, not just in rescuing people at that time of crisis when unemployment rose very sharply, but actually for those people who went through that programme, their long-term employment outcomes are significantly better than for those who were not offered that opportunity. And so Amendment Amendment 10 offers the chance for the devolution of programmes and the development of programmes like the Future Jobs Fund, which the Scottish Parliament may be interested to develop. Finally, can I say I very much echo the comments of the Honourable Lady, the Member for Livingston, in relation to access to work. It's clearly integral to the labour market chances of disabled people that they can have the financial support afforded by access to work to enable the adjustments that may be necessary to be made to enable them to participate in the workplace. This spans all levels of employment, from low entry-level jobs to extremely senior jobs, and we certainly believe that it's important that there is the opportunity for the Scottish Parliament to make the most of that fund. I'll give way to the Honourable Member.
Thanks very much. I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady for giving way on this point. I was a Urmston activist, and I found that access to work programmes not only help people get into work, but helped existing employees who develop, say for example, a visual impairment to get their opportunities to continue employment. So it's a device for people to stay in work, not just get into work.
The Honourable Member is right. It's a device for people to enter work, it's a device for them to stay in work, and it's a device for them to progress at work. And indeed, access to work supports some very senior people in very, very highly qualified positions, and it would be very regrettable indeed if changes to the programme were to put that at risk. And that leads me to my final point, Sir David, which is in relation to why, there could be real advantage in devolving access to work or programmes like it, which is that the decision-making and administration processes could be swifter and more attuned again to the needs of both the local labour market and the local workforce at that level of devolution. And that's why, too, given the problems that we know are being experienced with a national programme, which appears to be quite inflexible in the way in which it deals with people, if that too could be devolved as part of this package.
Mr. Ian Murray.
Thank you very much, Sir David, and perhaps maybe I should just sit down and allow my honourable friend, the member for Denton and Reddish, to just guess what may be in my speech. Perhaps maybe he could give us the lottery numbers for Saturday as well while he's at it. Well, he may not be that good. No, not with the. If he'd won the lottery, he wouldn't be wearing that suit, Sir David, would he? I wish to move amendments 11391. See, I could be nasty to my own side as well as the SNP if they're taking note. I wish to move amendments 11391, 114 and 10 in my name and those of my honourable friend are largely concerned with minor and technical changes to existing legislation. So I will turn immediately to our amendment 113, which would allow the provision of employment programmes where assistance is for less than 1 year. I don't think the reasoning behind this amendment requires much in the way of explanation, other than to point out that many people move jobs several times a year. This is especially so in current highly fluid labour market, where there's a dearth of long-term secure employment, and indeed the labour market is being seen to be short-term insecure with poorly paid work. Many people in part-time looking for full-time, and many people indeed on 0 hours contracts. The Smith Agreement clearly states that the Scottish Parliament, and I quote, will have all powers over support for unemployed people through the employment programmes currently contracted to the Department of Work and Pensions. However, Clause 26 of the bill, as currently drafted, restricts the powers devolved to employment support programmes that last at least a year. Our Amendment 113 removes this restriction to allow it to develop programmes to support those who move in and out of work within that 1 year time frame. Amendment 9 emphasises that employment support programmes in Scotland must be developed in close conjunction with local authorities. This was to ensure that service delivery is tailored to the needs and circumstances of local communities and is responsive to the local jobs market. In this regard, we are happy to give our support to the SNP Amendments 122, which provide for the creation of new employment programmes in Scotland on the understanding that they are developed and run in close conjunction with Scottish local authorities. I'm happy to give way to the
honourable gentleman. I wonder if I could expand on the position of local authorities and the point I put to his colleague from Manchester about the nature of many local authorities in Scotland, which I think makes it slightly more difficult to put it down to local authority level than it may do in certain other areas.
Well, I do agree to a certain extent, and particularly where the honourable gentleman represents. A lot of the local authorities are either incredibly small in terms of population numbers or incredibly large in terms of geography, and that geography, and that would have its challenges. But many local authorities are working together on a whole aspects of Scottish local government life. And in terms of Edinburgh, where I represent, they work very closely with Midlothian, which is a local authority which is indeed smaller than my own constituency, and East Lothian, West Lothian and Fife tend to work together on lots of these issues. So double devolution to local authorities, that doesn't necessarily mean to one individual authority, and many will probably work together to try and make best use of those work programmes and job opportunities. Now I'll give way to my honourable friend who's going to tell me what I'm saying next.
I can tell him the bonus ball's 32, Sir David. But the issue about local authorities, I think, is an important one that's been made. Of course, the Manchester example isn't one single local authority. It's a combined authority of 10 metropolitan borough councils, and that would also be possible in Scotland and indeed other parts of the United Kingdom for local authorities to come together to bid for the work programme.
He's absolutely right, Sir David, and I hope the bonus ball this week isn't 32, because we could be in some significant trouble if that is indeed the case. But he's right, it's about local authorities working together, and there's nothing wrong with saying the Scottish Parliament has been a centralist government. That's what's happened by nature of the policies that have been pursued. That's a choice, a legitimate choice for a government to make, but all we're suggesting is perhaps that some of these work programmes that are best delivered by local authorities are sent to local authorities. And I know my own local authority, Edinburgh, with a lot of the programmes that it runs in terms of the JET programme for young people and some of the programmes to get people into work, particularly disabled people, are highly successful, and we should be trusting in them to be able to do that and have to give way.
Would the honourable gentleman agree with me that the Opportunities for All programme that was referred to earlier is a really good example of one of those policy areas where the Scottish Government is working closely with local authorities to deliver services for and opportunities for young people? And similarly, the Scottish Welfare Fund, which we talked about in debates earlier this afternoon, is another good example of a local authority administered and delivered scheme. And surely when he's talking about centralist government, he needs to remember that 90% of ring-fenced funding has actually been devolved to local authorities by the Scottish Government, and that he might want to take a look over to Wales, where it seems to me that a Labour government is the one wanting to abolish local authorities altogether.
Well, I didn't want to turn this into a political argument, Sir David. I merely wanted to point out the fact that work programmes are best delivered by, in my view, local authorities. I mean, if the Welsh Government make the decision that it's best delivered in a different way, then that is up for them to do. But what the Honourable Lady highlights, actually, is in fact that devolution across the United Kingdom provides a whole array of different ways to deliver services. And I do hope that the Scottish Government takes some of this debate and look at whether or not we should be having double devolution. The principle of subsidiarity, which my honourable friend for Nottingham North was promoting in some of his new clauses, should, across the European Union and in the United Kingdom, should happily sit very firmly with the Scottish Government in terms of the way it associates itself with local government. Local government and COSLA have said quite clearly they feel that local authorities have been strangled across Scotland, and that's an incredibly important thing that I think we have to address. So I've said already that we would support the amendments in the name of the Scottish National Party, and I'm happy to give way again to it.
I'm interested in what the honourable gentleman is saying. I'm generally not trying to be difficult about it, but it does seem to me that the way the amendment is written, that it would say that the Scottish Parliament must devolve the powers to local authority. And that is perhaps a difficulty with this particular amendment, because it's not always going to be appropriate for local authorities, even perhaps a group of local authorities, to do it. And I think if he's going to pursue the devolution of it, then there has to be a bit more flexibility as to how it's done. And I think his current amendment is perhaps flawed in that way.
Well, the honourable gentleman, in all the time that I've known him, has never been difficult. But I think in terms of this particular issue, we're debating a Scotland bill which we feel doesn't go far enough in both spirit and substance, because we want more powers into the Scottish Parliament. And we have the honourable gentleman, the SNP's chief whip, wanted to hold on to that power with both hands. He doesn't want to release any of it. He wants to keep it in Edinburgh and Holyrood so he can build an ivory tower for Scotland in terms of all these powers, and doesn't practice that in terms of giving it to local authority. And I'm delighted I've been able to give him a little bit of exercise by bouncing up and down.
Well, I think the honourable gentleman, him and I have crossed swords in many bills in the past, but he is misrepresenting what I said. I'm sure not deliberately. But the point being that his If this goes through in the way he has written it, it would mean there is an obligation to devolve now to local authorities, i.e. to each individual local authority as I read it. And that is not what he is now saying about a conglomeration of local authorities. So it seems to me this amendment, as it is written, is flawed. Perhaps the idea behind it is not so flawed, but certainly the particular amendment is.
Well, we're in trouble, Sir David, when I can't even persuade the people who agree with the broad principle, and I'm trying to persuade the government to accept an amendment to the Scotland Bill. And it may be badly drafted. He knows the way this place works. We put our amendments in to press the government to do something about a particular piece of legislation in committee stage. The government ultimately reject it. 87 amendments, I remember, I promoted to the Enterprise and Regulated Reform Bill a few years ago. 87 were rejected. I was delighted that 4 or 5 came back as the government's own ideas at report stage, and that's essentially what will happen. And I'm sure the Secretary of State, when he said he would go away and reflect, was doing just that, going away to reflect on what ones he may be able to claim as his own and what ones that he'll ultimately reject at report stage. But I do hope the honourable gentleman, who have a lot of time for him, can I just put on record that we agreed with most of the things together when we crossed swords in other committees, particularly with regards to the privatisation of Royal Mail and the Postal Services Act. So we don't always disagree, Sir David, but I do feel the broad principle of double devolution by transferring powers from Holyrood to local communities is one that we should all be supporting, to make sure that we can have powerhouse local authorities in Scotland and take power closer to the people who we seek to represent. I think we perhaps have covered most of the next part that I wish to raise with the House in terms of double devolution. I may just say that it's a fairly obvious thing to say, but that local authorities do know their local jobs markets better than anyone else, and the principle and landscape of a job market in one local authority or one conglomerate of local authorities will be very much different from others. And I think we should be looking at trying to tailor these employment support programmes, not just to individual needs and individual community needs, but in areas where there will be a greater need, or a greater need for a certain skill set perhaps than in other areas. So in my own city, as an example, we are very much at the forefront of financial services and academia, which is completely different if you were perhaps in a more rural constituency, and local authorities would be able to tailor those programmes. And of course, crucially, Sir David, which is something that we tend not to talk about in this House, is not just transferring the power, but actually transferring the resources that go with it. And local authorities in Scotland have been completely starved of resources, and they require those resources to be able to do the job that we want them to do. I thought it was a great speech by the Honourable Lady from Livingston. She said many of the things that we'd absolutely agree with, but one glaring omission from her speech was the issue about retraining and education and further education and reskilling. And we know that further education in Scotland is not just the mechanism for young people to perhaps go back into education or to be retrained or reskilled, but it's actually the place where many people get that second chance in education and are able to go back to something perhaps that they failed at many years ago, or perhaps they are going back to retrain after having families. And one of the things that I think Scotland is suffering from at the moment is the fact that we have 144,000 fewer college places now than we did in 2007, and that's hampering these second chances. So I hope that evolution of the work programme does end up at the Scottish Parliament and ultimately ends up in local authorities, and the honourable gentleman shaking his head there, so it must be true. Then we are able to resolve the issues with regards to the college places that have been lost as well. Let me move on to Amendment 114. Would provide for the devolution of the Access to Work scheme as well to the Scottish Parliament. Access to Work provides practical advice and support to disabled people and their employers to help them overcome work-related obstacles resulting from disability. This is an incredibly powerful and important programme, and a very close friend of mine, Mark Cooper, who has cerebral palsy, has been on the Access to Work programme for some time, was able to take a job that covered maternity leave in Glasgow, 45 miles away, but was able to work with the employer Access to Work scheme to be able to travel not just to Glasgow, but to have an adapted place of work for him to be able to work. And although Mark does drift in and out of employment because of his disability, the Access to Work scheme for people with disabilities and the obstacles relating to those disabilities have to be overcome, and the devolution of that as well to local authorities would certainly allow that to be better tailored to local needs. Access to work is also closely aligned with employment support, and we're aware that a number of charities, including Inclusion Scotland and the WISE Group, are in favour of devolving it to Scotland. Finally, Sir David, our Amendment 10 allows for the introduction of a jobs guarantee, which will provide a temporary job paid at least the minimum wage to provide a route back into long-term employment for young people or people who have been out of work for over 2 years. This is very similar to the jobs guarantee we had in our manifesto at the general election, and would allow us to devolve some of those responsibilities for getting young people in the long term back into work. And again, local authorities would be best placed to deliver those, despite what my honourable friend on this side of the House thinks that would be a bad idea. I hope the Government will reflect on some of these issues, as the Secretary of State has said he would reflect, and come back, if they disagree with them, today at report stage with some proper devolution, not just to the Scottish Parliament in terms of employment schemes and around disability and access to work, but certainly how we can find a mechanism to get these out of the hands of Edinburgh and into local authorities.
David. I'd like to begin by commending the contributions, I think not just in this particular grouping, but throughout the day today. There have been calls that have, through the debate, saying that we are not doing as the Smith Commission has said, but we are clear on these benches that the Smith Commission recommended that the UK Government devolve all powers in relation specifically to contracted employment programmes, and this clause in particular goes well beyond this remit and would include the powers to use to operate support through Job Centre Plus. Beyond this, there are key reasons that this clause does not work. Firstly, there would be no clear demarcation of responsibilities between the Scottish and UK governments around the provision of employment support. The UK government would retain the executive competence under existing legislation and could continue to operate employment programmes and Job Centre Plus. This would create a confusing, disjointed and misaligned landscape of support that could hinder as much as it could to help to move people back to work. So the Government's Clause 26 manages this risk by creating clear lines of accountability between those claimants that Scottish ministers are able to create employment programmes for and those claimants that will continue to be supported through the Job Centre Plus structure. In particular, it makes it clear that the Scottish Parliament can only provide employment support for claimants who are at risk of long-term employment where the assistance lasts at least a year for those with disabilities that are likely to need greater support, thereby drawing a line between such schemes and the core functions of Job Centre Plus. This, of course, enables a smooth delivery of an integrated welfare and benefit system and, importantly, will result in a better service for claimants. I think it's fair to say that through this discussion, I would like to highlight in particular that all through the discussion about contracted employment programmes and the devolution of contracted employment programmes, there have been extensive discussions through the Joint Ministerial Working Group on Welfare, which of course has been playing a key role to ensure that the responsibility of the transfers of these powers are seamless. And of course, as my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State, said earlier on in his own remarks, that these are ongoing discussions, and importantly, we are working through officials to set up the right framework, the right ways of working, and importantly as well, with regards to work programme, we've had many meetings officials have with Scottish Government officials on a range of aspects relating to the delivery of contracted employment support programmes, and that engagement is good, and that engagement is of course about how we can work together to develop integrated support at a local level, and of course to look at the whole aspect of skills development, Scotland in job centres, which of course is going strong today. I'd like to touch on some of the other points that have been raised in this debate, and the Honourable Member for Livingston in her address spoke of course about the current system with regards to employment. And I would like to say that with regards to welfare reforms, the current system that this government has had is delivering and is working in Scotland too. And of course that has been demonstrated through record levels of employment, record levels of men and women in employment, and of course helping, importantly, providing support for more lone parents going back to work as well. And of course what we've seen in Scotland is that these benefits now mean that we have over 2.62 2 million people in Scotland are back in work, and employment continues to rise, and that is something that is to be commended, it's to be supported. And I think through our ongoing discussions, certainly both at official level but at ministerial level as well, this of course is at the heart of trying to achieve through our discussions and obviously through the bill itself. Now, turning to Amendment 113, this particular amendment applies to the matters which Clause 26 will accept from the existing reservation for job search and support. Clause 26 delivers on the Smith Commission agreement to give the Scottish Parliament the legislative competence to establish employment programmes that support disabled people and that offer long-term support to benefit claimants at the risk of long-term unemployment. This, I have no doubt, is welcomed by all honourable members. The amendment to Clause 26 would, as proposed, change the scope of the legislative competence of the Scottish Parliament to allow for the provision of employment programmes for those at risk of long-term unemployment where assistance, as I've said already, is for less than one year in particular. This is also with regards to securing the employment landscape in Scotland. We want to ensure that there is no confusing landscape when it comes to the support structure in Scotland, and importantly we want to ensure that Job Centre Plus continues to deliver effectively for claimants, but also that it gives employers greater continuity in terms of the overall landscape as well. So, David, I'd now like to speak to Amendments 9, 10 and 114, and I'd like to do that collectively because just to see how, or to raise in particular, how Clause 26 covers many of these points already. Amendment 9 seeks to add to the illustrative list of the ways in which the power to make arrangements for employer support might be used. Honourable members will therefore be pleased to hear that the list provided in the clause is purely illustrative and that it would be absolutely possible for the Scottish Government to work with local authorities and other partners, stakeholders, to design and deliver employment programmes. This also applies, Sir David, to Amendment 10. The amendment only seeks to add to the illustrative forms of assistance that the Scottish ministers might provide under Clause 26. On the point of the devolution of the Access to Work programme, the subject of Amendment 114, we have again not sought to unreasonably limit the legislative competence of the Scottish Parliament. Non-repayable awards, such as those provided through the Access to Work scheme, are already covered in Clause 26. As such, the Scottish Government can choose to introduce a similar form of support for disabled people, additional to that provided by the Access to Work programme, should they wish to do so. Given that access to work is an integral element of the support that we offer, I want to be clear that this government intends to continue with the Access to Work provision in Scotland, and it will retain the associated funding. And I hope that my response has assured honourable members in the House that Clause 26 fully enables the Scottish Parliament to make the provisions covered in Amendments 9, 10 and 114 and sets out a clear rationale as to why Access to Work programme will remain a reserved programme.
Hannah Bodden.
Thank you very much, Sir David. It's been a fascinating debate and it's been a pleasure to take part in it, and it seems to me that there is a lot of agreement across the benches on this side of the House. The Honourable Member for Stretford and Urmston made some very important points about tailoring work programmes in D&D, and I would certainly agree with much of what she said in West Lothian. Although Livingston is the name of the constituency, it doesn't fully take into consideration the many former mining towns that I have in my constituency, and I know well the impact of deindustrialisation and the need for tailored work programmes. And in terms of the future job fund and the matter that the honourable member for Edinburgh South raised, certainly be interested in looking at those, and we can work together on those, and certainly the member for the Honourable Member for Stretford and Urmston mentioned access to work and the importance that she placed on it, and how she saw the importance of devolution. My honourable colleague spoke about his involvement with Unison as a Unison representative, and the importance of access to work for those who have a disability, and how it could help people who were already in work if they developed a disability in getting further employment. And my colleague from Banff and Buchan spoke passionately earlier and throughout this debate about opportunities for all, and I would restate that point, that it has been a huge success in Scotland and a very good example of how local authorities have worked closely with the government. You know, my colleague here from Angus, I think we still are stuck on that point that the member for Edinburgh South made about the detail of devolution of those powers locally. As the member for Banff Buchan said, 90% of ring fencing has been abolished. The member for Edinburgh South also made a point on college funding, and I think it's important to highlight that, you know, he perhaps missed my comments on modern apprenticeships and the increased numbers and investment that the Scottish Government and the SNP Government has put into that. And it's clear that we're investing more in colleges than Labour ever did, because college resource budgets of £526 million in 2015-16 are well above Labour's highest level of £510 million in 2006-2007 in cash terms. Nonetheless. And under the SNP, the number of full-time students under 25 has increased, and older students have also benefited, with the number of full-time students under the age of 25 increasing by over 15%. And the number of full-time students over the age of 25 at colleges in Scotland has also gone up. The Minister talked a lot about access to work and why that shouldn't be devolved, and also the success of the current system, and the fact that it could be disjointed if further powers were devolved. However, we would argue on these benches and on this side of the House that there is already a significant amount of disjointed approach and a number of problems with benefit sanctions, and I know that many of us members here have people coming through their surgeries and the doors of their constituency offices with very harrowing and desperate cases of people who've been sanctioned on benefits. And the CAB have actually provided us with a number of cases. A South of Scotland CAB report of a client who'd been sanctioned for the second time in 12 months for failing to log in to a universal job match, with the client's local library had been closed for refurbishment and there was no other access to public computers in the local area. The sanction was upheld following a mandatory reconsideration request, and the client had a letter from his doctor stating that his mental health had declined as a direct result of the sanctions applied. The client was also building debts with his council tax and his home telephone had been disconnected. We have to remember that we are not just debating statistics today, we are debating real people's lives and real situations, people who are left in desperate situations as a result of the benefit sanctions. And if we do not change the system, people in Scotland and across the UK will continue to suffer.
The question is that Amendment 120 be made. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. No! Division. Clear the lobbies. Order.
The ayes to the right, 260. The noes to the left, 316.
The ayes to the right were 260. The noes to the left were 316. I think the noes have it. The noes have it. Unlock the doors. With the leave of the House, we would take clauses 26 to 30 together. The question is that clause 26 to 30 stand part of the bill. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Mr. Murray to move new clause 20 formally. The question is that new clause 28 be read a second time. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. No. Division. Clear the lobbies. Order.
The ayes to the right, 259. The noes to the left, 317.
The ayes to the right were 259. The noes to the left were 317. I think the noes have it. The noes have it. Unlock the doors. Mr Murray to move new clause 31 formally. The question is that new clause 31 be read a second time. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. Division. Clear the lobbies. Order! Order!
The ayes to the right, 258. The noes to the left, 317.
The ayes to the right, 258. The noes to the left, 317. The noes have it. The noes have it. Unlock. Right. Who's going to move this next question?
No, so we've got to have the next new clause, yes?
Which is 39.
New clause
The question is that The question is that new clause 39 to be moved formally. Move formally. Thank you, Dr. Whiteford. The question is that new clause 39 be read a second time. As many of that opinion say aye. The contrary, no. Division, clear the lobbies.
Mel.
Order.
The ayes to the right, 58. The noes to the left, 550.
One more. That's very kind. The ayes to the right, 58. The noes to the left, 515. The noes have it. The noes have it. Unlock.
And the House has spoken.
Well and truly.
Report progress and let's leave to sit again.
The question is that I do report progress and ask leave to sit again. As many of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Order, order.
Just give me a minute. Report that the committee has made progress and ask leave to sit again.
Sit again. Committee to sit again what day?
Tomorrow, sir.
Committee to sit again tomorrow. A point of order, Mr Murray, I believe.
Deputy Speaker, I don't normally make points of order, but I wonder if you could just confirm that we've just voted on new clause 39, which is a fundamental principle of the devolution of national insurance, without having had any debate or discussion on that particular clause.
As you well know, actually, it's not a point of order, and you wouldn't be questioning the chair, as I well know, as the decision was taken earlier. Right, let's make some progress. The question is, this House do now adjourn.